and there's really interesting research, if you look at research on incels, is that there's an online radicalization process. And this is not actually, it's not really anyone's fault. It's just interesting because if you think about YouTube, right? If I watch a video on YouTube on incels, what is YouTube going to suggest to me? So, hi, Dr. K. Do you have any advice on female incels? I'm in my late 20s and have never had a boyfriend. This has caused me to develop severe self-esteem issues. I've heard you say that women are the ones who pick the partners. What? And that women have to deal with too much attention and harassment. I have the opposite problem of most women. This makes me feel almost subhuman. I also feel like I'm running out of time to experience a romantic relationship. If no one wanted to be with me in the teens and 20s, what chance do I have in my 30s and 40s? So this is a great question. So one of the really interesting things, so we're actually writing a paper at Healthy Gamer on incels. And we've been doing a lot of research on this topic because I think it's something that a lot of people suffer from and struggle with. And I think a lot of our, we try to support the incel community, for lack of a better term. I mean, I know that sounds kind of scary, but what I mean by that is like, we try to help people understand that they have intrinsic value and that a lot of the sort of incel kind of thinking and belief system may not be entirely correct. So there are a couple of things that I want to point out. The first is that generally speaking, incel appears to be like refers to men, right? So if you look at the published literature on incels, they tend to focus entirely on men. But it's been our experience that there are actually like female people who identify with the term incel. So I think that's a huge problem in like the published literature in the way that people look at things. So I think that, this sort of belief or idea that you're an incel and will never find a romantic relationship is not gender specific. It may certainly be more prevalent in men. I'm not quite sure. I'd really have to see statistics around that, but generally speaking, makes sense to me because I tend to see or hear more about male incels. I don't know if I said that women pick their partners, I know that that's a lot of like the thinking of incels is that women, there's a sexual marketplace and whatnot. I mean, I generally speaking, so if I said that in the past, I didn't mean it like that. And it's my experience that generally speaking, when you're picking a partner, like both people pick, right? It's sort of the whole idea behind a partnership is that it's like a mutual arrangement. And it's not like one person is picking and the other person isn't. I understand that that's been some people's experiences, and some people can definitely get into the sort of relationship where there's a power dynamic. So don't get me wrong there. That's definitely possible. But I think that generally speaking, if you think about a relationship, it's like the whole point is that there's a relation, right? So there's like both people are sort of agreeing to have this relationship. And so I think the problem here is that if we listen to what this person says, they're saying women are the ones who get to pick, and I have the opposite problem. So I'm not like most women, therefore I feel subhuman. So if you stop and think about it for a second, what you see is that the feeling of subhuman is rooted in the idea that most people are one way and I am the other way. So it's interesting because like where do you get the idea that most women are one way and that you're a different way? So I think that there's also something that's very common for people, which is that they feel like they're running out of time to experience a romantic relationship. And that makes sense. Like the time, the hourglass is kind of going, and the further that you go, the worse off you are. So I want to share with you guys a couple of the things that we've discovered through our research. I mean, it's not like this stuff is sort of known already, but like this is what we pieced together is maybe a better way to put it. So the first is that when people are incels, that it's primarily like sort of a psychological thing. So it's not actually like, it's a belief system. So here's what happens with an incel. So they start out with usually some kind of adverse experience or the idea of a missed milestone. So it's not even like necessarily something bad happened to them, but they turn 18 or they turn 21 or they graduate from college. And it starts with this sort of idea that like, I was supposed to have done something by a particular time. So there's a missed milestone. That's where it starts. Or some kind of rejection or negative experience. And then what's really changed now is that we can sort of engage with communities that will actually like reinforce this idea. So if you engage with a community where everyone else has missed milestones and none of the people have sort of made it out of inceldom, it's going to color your perspective on the world. And so then what becomes a personal experience that maybe is actually changeable starts to feel like universal truth. and there's really interesting research, if you look at research on incels, is that there's an online radicalization process. And this is not actually, it's not really anyone's fault. It's just interesting because if you think about YouTube, right? If I watch a video on YouTube on incels, what is YouTube going to suggest to me? So you have these content platforms that are trying to do their best to make their content the most appealing to you. And if you watch one incel video, then you're going to get populated with like a second one. And if you watch a second one, then you're going to get populated with 4 and 6 and 10. So there's this online radicalization effect, which is probably has something to do with the algorithms of content platforms. So it's not like people are purposely seeking this stuff out. Maybe some of them are. But if you look, there's this online drift. So you start out with sort of like the gateway drug. And then you kind of gradually, like what happens is these platforms will push you towards more radicalizing content. So this is why you see radicalization in general amongst politics and all kinds of other things. So it has a really interesting effect on your psychology. And so psychologically, what starts to happen is your experience becomes incredibly validated. And now we get to something else about the incel community, is that it's incredibly validating, right? Like this person feels like they're subhuman. And so it can feel actually really good to be like in a community with other people who feel subhuman because they're people who get you, right? They're your people. And so like this is a world that rejects you. And so you can find a community that accepts you the way you are and says, yeah, it sucks. It's not your fault. There's a sexual marketplace value. Your jawline isn't manly enough. You were born with the beta gene. It's not your fault. Don't feel that way about yourself. It's sad. It's true. It's incredibly validating. And so there's this weird kind of combination of online radicalization along with like warm, open arms, which then gets people to really think this way, right? And then you start thinking that way. It's very emotionally like gratifying. And then you can start to believe these things. And it's not wrong to believe them because that's what your brain is designed to do. If you're hanging out with 1,000 people that all tell you the same thing, like you're going to start believing it. It's like how it works. The short answer is that you've still got a chance, like absolutely, right? So the only time you don't have a chance is when you stop trying. That's really the only thing that will determine when you don't have a chance. And I've worked with tons of incels, and my experience has been that what's really at the core of it is the self-esteem. It's not that like, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because once certain experiences cause you to have a self-esteem, that feeling of being subhuman is going to affect every romantic interaction that you have. And so it's overcoming that internal feeling of self-esteem or feeling subhuman, which will then naturally alter the way that you engage in relationships. So oddly enough, I think people think about being an incel, and the cure to being an incel is getting laid or finding a partner. And so then you're no longer an incel. But we've even had people on stream who have like had relationships and they're like, I'm still an incel. So it's bizarre because people think that becoming no longer being an incel is about an outward change, but it's not about an outward change. It's about an internal change. And we've seen that. We've seen people who like actually have relationships, have women that persistently ask them out and they still feel like an incel. And so it has nothing to do with the outside. You being an incel has nothing to do with like the way that people treat you. It has everything to do with the way that you perceive yourself, right? Because is there like a, crowd of people that's like running around and like calling you an incel? No, it's an identity that you take on. And so the cool thing is that if it's an identity that you take on, it's also within your power to no longer have it. Now, it's not easy. I'm making it sound easy. It's certainly not easy. It takes a lot of work, right? So it requires a lot of like effort and self-reflection and really like digging to the bottom of your self-esteem. So I'd say that the real approach is to like tackle the samskar of low self-esteem. And this is where I'd even say like, when did you start feeling like you were an incel? Because I don't think it's like, has nothing to do with your 20s. It's probably happened a long time ago. May even have nothing to do, when did you start feeling subhuman? It may not have even been in your teen years. Like you may have had some kind of experience in childhood where you really, really felt like subhuman. And so that feeling of subhumanness, which you carry with you, then finds a new set of clothes, which is inceldom. And so it like puts that on. So I think there's absolutely hope for you. You just have to be willing to try. And I know that you try really, really hard. It's just you have to try in sort of a different way. So I'd say forget about the incel, forget about the relationships, and focus a little bit about what's really chipped away at your self-esteem, what's contributed this idea that you're subhuman, and work on like building confidence and spending time with nature and like things like that. Okay? Hope that's helpful, and good luck to you.